Okay, rolling now? Alright, so listen. 48 is definitely one of the most complex and complicated situations, and it's anything but black and white. As a whole, though, as far as we can generalize about the situation, I do not believe that Israel should have to compensate those who fled their homes, or with repatriation, or in any financial way. And the reason is this: Israel did not automatically come out in any kind of aggressive way against or the Arabs living within what was defined as the State of Israel by the UN partition plan, or the Palestinians living in any other place. It was a war that was started first by the Arabs living within the country, the Palestinians, and afterwards it was compounded by the invasion of Israel by the surrounding Arab states. The status quo was changed by that, not by anything Israel did, and we therefore can't assume that Israel would have done anything to the local Palestinians had this war not started. So in my eyes, there's no reason that Israel should have to take any responsibility financially or otherwise. However, the issue of Palestinian refugees is one of the big 5 or 6 issues standing in between us and peace with the Palestinians. And I do believe that at the end of the day, while it's a demographic impossibility to repatriate the Palestinians into what is Israel today, Israel in a symbolic or moral sense will have to come out and take a certain amount of responsibility for what happened. And once again, in my capacity as a person, not as an IDF soldier, I do believe that in some cases Israel is guilty of doing wrong. There were Palestinians that were forced to flee their houses, some cases for the right reasons, some cases for the wrong reasons. I mean, everyone knows the case, or a lot of people know the case of Deir Yassin. And I think Israel does need to take in a symbolic sense responsibility for its wrongdoings in that period.
So now you do have thousands of Palestinians who live in the West Bank and Gaza, which are areas that they don't feel are their original homeland. They feel that their homeland existed in what is today Israel. So do you think that those Palestinians can ever come to terms with that fact and live peacefully side by side with Israel in a Palestinian state?
Those Palestinians can live side by side with Israel?
In a Palestinian state that exists in the West Bank.
You're speaking about the ones who originally lived in Israel?
Yes.
Well, listen, first of all, those who originally lived in Israel are few and far between these days, because you're talking about people who were alive back in the late 40s.
Or the descendants.
Right? Or the descendants. Listen, peace in a situation like this is going to require compromise on both sides, serious compromise. If there's going to be peace between the two sides, therefore creation of a Palestinian state, you're going to have Jews who were born and are living in areas of the West Bank that are going to have to leave their homes, current homes. So if the Palestinians, I mean, I can only hope that if there's Palestinians who are descendants of those who fled or were forced in 1948 out of Israel proper, they're going to have to compromise, they're going to have to understand, they're going to have to agree to live peacefully in a Palestinian state side by side with Israel, because frankly that's a much less of a compromise, or much less of a sacrifice to make compared with Jews who are going to leave their current homes, those that they were born in, that they lived in their entire lives, leave the West Bank. So they're going to have to, and I personally I hope they will.
In terms of those Palestinians who do live in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, you've been to Gaza and you're going to be in Ramallah, and though you have Fatah, you have Hamas, you have different leadership. Do you think that the Palestinians could ever really unify under a leadership that really takes the issue of peace seriously?
Listen, first of all, there is an inherent division between the two populations, between Gaza and the West Bank, even before the split between Hamas's rule in Gaza, and I mean, Gaza was traditionally always more of a religious population center than the West Bank was. Nevertheless, there was at a time unification under Fatah's rule. There was a time when Arafat was the undisputed, declared leader of the Palestinian people, and I believe that it can happen again. It's unfortunate now that it hasn't happened, but I will point to a number of studies that have taken place, one of which is something called the Geneva Accords that was put out by academics, both Israeli and Palestinian, in 2003, that was circulated widely within the West Bank, and I think Gaza as well, and of course Israel proper, and altogether over 70% of the people who responded favorably. So I do believe that at the end of the day, it is in the general interest of both Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and Israeli Arabs, Israeli Jews, to live side by side. It's just like in any other case, it's the extremists who take control of the situation, and of course, it's like anything.
But you said that the Palestinians were at one point largely unified under Yasser Arafat, and he was the undisputed ruler, but he still declined at the 2000 peace talks, which were, as to date, pretty much the most liberal and wide-ranging agreement that Israel has offered the Palestinians. So you think if they rejected something as wide-ranging as the Camp David talks in 2000, do you think they could ever accept a new deal that isn't as generous?
I still believe that, I mean, listen, when Yasser Arafat said no, a lot of what Yasser Arafat, he derived his power and the legitimacy of his rule, he derived that from his position as the ultimate warrior against the Israeli occupation and the Zionist regime and all these, like, you know, fancy terms that the Arabs use, right? Palestinians. That's what he derived his power from. Therefore, it would have been, I don't know, I don't think he was ever the right person to make peace. He had the support of the people, but he did not himself have the desire to do it. What is going to happen before a proper peace is, you know, this is just one of many complications, but what's going to happen is there's going to have to be a ruler who A, has the support of the people, and B, has the genuine desire to arrive at an agreement with the Israelis, with us. We all live side by side, maybe not warmest of relations, but at least in a cold peace, one in which, you know, we tolerate each other's existence.
So you think we should coexist as now?
Electronics are so expensive.
No, that's not what I said. Two states side by. When I said side by side, I do not in any way support a binational state coexisting inside of. No. Do not take that the wrong way. No. When I say side by side, I mean Palestinian state, Israeli state, Jewish state, Israeli state.
So in terms of the peace process and how not only the Palestinians who have a lot of reform and inward thinking and looking that they need to do in terms of Israel's responsibility as far as the peace process goes, there were, you know, largely three goals that we had in a state, which was a Jewish state, a democracy, and having it in the biblical land of Israel. And do you think that any one of those three issues is comparable in terms of peace? Do you think any one of those three issues is comparable in terms of peace? A Jewish majority,
in terms of peace.
because we have a Jewish, what they wanted in the state was a Jewish majority, a democracy, and to have it in all of the land of Israel. And some people say that
would any of those things compromise or be like sort of
or
counterstated?
do you think that Israelis should have to compromise on either
On any of those things?
On any of those three things?
Okay.
Because obviously, if we do have a Palestinian state in the West Bank, you do lose some of what is biblical Israel.
100%. I mean,
Which is one of those original
there's no
goals.
question if you want to have a Jewish state in all of the biblical land of Israel, first of all, like, that's never going to happen because part of the biblical land of Israel is like Lebanon and like Damascus is like part of like the Syrian capital is like biblical land of Israel. That's not going to happen. But just speaking of the Palestinian, with respect to the Palestinians, like, there's no question that the two are mutually exclusive. Like, you cannot have a Jewish state including all of the West Bank included in it, and have peace with the Palestinians. They won't agree to that. And furthermore, like, that begins to get very, very close to the issues of apartheid, which would be that if you have the Israeli, like, technically the West Bank is not, like, the Palestinians of the West Bank are not citizens of the state of Israel. If they were, then we would have problems because they don't have the same rights as Jews do in this state. It's, you know, blatant discrimination, right? So, like, the only option is to, like, if you want to have a Palestinian state, or you want to have peace, is frankly to detach yourself from the West Bank, even though it's considered biblical Israel.
So